Hey guys, I'm Mr. Hark. Tonight's story is about a team of scientists who record wild sounds in the mountains, and one night, their microphones picked up something that should not exist. They used AI to try to translate it, and the moment they saw what it said and what was making the sound, they shut everything down and walked away. Why? What did that voice say? And what does it have to do with Bigfoot? Stay till the end to find out, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who loves Bigfoot mysteries. Alright, let's begin. The part people always want to jump to is the line on the screen, that one sentence. They see a screenshot or a transcript, usually out of context, and they go, "There's no way that's real. A computer doesn't just translate Bigfoot." And I agree with them. I still do. But I was there when it wrote that sentence. I watched it appear word by word while something large and upright stood just inside the tree line, listening to us. That's the part I can't get past. It wasn't the sound that broke me. I've heard all kinds of things in the field. Elk screams, cougars, people drunk and lost, engines echoing weird in valleys. It was the feeling that something out there understood what we were doing and didn't like where it would go. That's why I shut the test down. That's why you're only hearing this as a story and not seeing it in a journal. Because the last thing, that they said through the model was basically, if you tell the world we're here, they'll come and finish the job. And the worst part is, I think they're right. When this happened, I was 39. My name's Lena Park. I was the field lead for the Cascadia Bioacoustics Lab back then, out of a university near Seattle. My work is boring on paper. Long-term sound monitoring, wildfire impact, migration changes, lots of grant reports, lots of data cleaning, not a lot of glamour. I grew up in Washington. My dad worked construction, my mom ran a nail salon. Nobody in my family was academic, but we camped. We hunted a little. We picked mushrooms in the fall. Forest felt normal to me. People always assume I must have been into Bigfoot growing up around here. I wasn't. I thought it was a tourist thing, basically. Stick structures, blurry photos, podcasts where guys whisper about rocks being thrown at their tents. So if you're waiting for me to say I believed in all this my whole life, no, I didn't. I still don't know what I believe, to be honest. I just know what I saw and heard and what I helped shut down. The project that led us into this mess was as straightforward as it gets. We had a multi-year grant to monitor how wildfire seasons were changing wildlife behavior. That was the pitch. We set up weatherproof autonomous recording units, ARUs, across a big chunk of the North Cascades, add some infrasound sensors, a handful of thermal trail cams, a network that could keep everything synced, collect everything that made noise in the woods after dark, and see how patterns shifted as fire seasons got longer and hotter. We had dozens of units, some in easy places, near roads, near trails, and some way the hell out there, 2 or 3 hours off any official path. We strapped them to cedar trunks and hemlocks, lashed them to rebar in talus fields, tucked them in bear boxes. It was a lot of slogging in the rain, swapping SD cards with cold fingers, fighting condensation and mold. That was my world. Gear checks, coordinates, batteries, spreadsheets. The lab itself was small. There was me. There was Rafael, our machine learning guy, Brazilian, mid-30s, always twitching between screens like he was afraid of missing a notification. There was Nadine, a phonetics professor we pulled in part-time because the grant liked cross-disciplinary buzzwords. And then we had 1 or 2 grad students rotating through, doing all the unglamorous stuff. If you had walked in on us any given day, you'd have seen a bunch of tired people listening to owl calls and rain noise and annotating spectrograms. That's it. The only reason any of this turned into that AI Bigfoot thing is because one of the ARUs didn't get the memo to stay boring. The unit that started everything was labeled C47. The C was just the sector. C for Cascadia, if you want a story. In reality, it was just the third letter in a naming scheme that made sense to us and nobody else. C47 was mounted on a cedar about 2 hours hike in from an old gated spur road. No official trail. Hunters used the area. Mushrooms pickers. We'd seen ATV tracks there before the gate went up. You could hear the river from the site, but only as a kind of low hiss. The forest there was thick. Cedar, hemlock, big leaf maple, all that. sword ferns up to your waist. We put that unit in mostly because it was quiet at night. Little road noise, not much air traffic, good baseline. For a year and a half, C47 gave us exactly what we expected. Owls, frogs when it was warmer, coyotes further up valley, elk bugling during rut, rain on leaves, branches cracking here and there. Nothing weird. Then, late October 2025, the software flagged something. We had a script that would surface unusual patterns. Not mysterious voices, just stuff that didn't match known sound profiles in the library, new machinery maybe, or some kind of illegal logging. The script slapped a red mark on a 7-minute chunk from 2004 7 a.m. and stuck it in a folder. I wasn't even the one who saw it first. One of the grad students, Megan, found it during a Monday batch check. I remember her coming to my office with that look, bored but curious. "Hey Lena, C47's got something. It's either a glitch or..." She shrugged and didn't finish. We walked back to the lab computer together. Raphael was there already, headphones around his neck, staring at the spectrogram like someone had flipped it upside down. "You see this?" he said, tapping the screen. It's like somebody's talking, but it's not in the database." He had that excited tone he got when something broke his expectations. On the screen, the spectrogram for that 7-minute window did look odd. You could see these bands of sound rising and falling in a way that looked structured. There were gaps between them, not like random barks or howls, more like phrases. We listened. I still remember the first time I heard it. There was river noise, soft rain, the usual hiss. Then a low sound came in, too low to be any owl, not quite like elk. It wasn't a roar, more like a drawn-out vowel, if I had to put it in human terms. It rose, dipped, and cut off. Then there was a pause. Then another sound, a little higher, shorter. Then another pause. Then the first voice again, back and forth. 7 minutes of that. No overlapping. Like turn-taking, I remember saying, could be 2 elk. Or elk, and a weird echo. I wanted it to be that. Raphael shook his head. "Elk don't do that. And look," he zoomed in on the spectrogram, the formants, the harmonics. "They're staying in a band that's closer to, like, a big primate than a deer. I don't know, man. It's weird." Nadine came in later that day. I hadn't called her. She just walked past the lab and heard the audio through the open door. She stood behind us, listened once, and said very quietly, "Play that again." So we did. You have to understand how careful Nadine is. She's not the kind of person who hears a noise and goes, "It's aliens." She hears a noise and goes, "The microphone was probably at a funny angle." She listened to the whole 7 minutes. Not once, but 3 times. She didn't talk while it played. She closed her eyes like she was trying to see it in her head. After the 3rd run-through, she sat down and rubbed her forehead. "It sounds like turn-taking," she said finally. "Conversation like, I mean. I'm not saying it is language. I'm saying it's shaped like it." That was the first time any of us used the word language, talking about something we hadn't even seen yet. We did what you're supposed to do. We started with the boring explanations. We checked the timestamps for interference, looked for overlapping recordings from nearby ARUs, ran it against all the wildlife libraries we had: owls, elk, coyotes, wolf, bear, even human voices. Nothing matched. We pulled the raw wave off the encrypted card from C47 to make sure it wasn't a transfer glitch. Same thing, same pattern. Then we did something I kind of regret now. We fed it into Raphael's newer model. The grant had let him build this whole, self-supervised pipeline, denoising, source separation, clustering, the works. He'd been excited about using it to pick out new owl call variations, actually useful stuff. He cleaned the recording up, took out river noise and wind, isolated the main sound source as best he could. Then he ran a phoneme discovery step. That's a fancy way of saying the model tried to find recurring little pieces of sound, like vowels and consonants, without knowing any language ahead of time. On his screen, little clusters appeared, colors, labels, all that machine learning eye candy. But underneath that, something real was happening. "These units, they're stable," he said, pointing. "They're not random. You've got a small inventory of repeat shapes, and they combine in patterns. See how this one always follows that one? That's syntactic-ish. Like a suffix." I remember laughing once, a short, nervous sound. "So what, we've got grammar now," I said. In the North Cascades, Nadine didn't laugh. We might have structure, she said. That's enough. We still weren't thinking Bigfoot. None of us said that word. The most we said was uncatalogued primate, and even then it was half a joke. If C47 hadn't had a thermal camera nearby, maybe it would have stayed a weird sound file forever. But we did have a camera. And that night, it caught something. Thermal video is ugly. It's just shapes. Heat against cold. We had the camera set up about 80-90 yards from the ARU, aimed down a kind of game corridor between trees. Most nights all you'd see were deer, once in a while a bear, sometimes nothing at all. That night, 2 minutes into the audio, a shape slipped between the trunks. There's no way to show it here obviously, but I can still see it when I close my eyes. A vertical heat mass. Not glowing, just warmer than the background. It moved from left to right behind a clump of trees, then stopped, then leaned just a little, like someone shifting their weight. It was broad. Too broad for a lone human with a pack, in my opinion. The height estimate we got later from the parallax and the tree spacing put it at over 7 feet. Closer to 8. Could it have been a tall guy in heavy gear? Sure, on paper. But this is at nearly 3 in the morning, in late October, in a valley with no legal road access, no lights, no trails. Night temps close to freezing. You'd have to really want to be there. The shape stood there for about 30 seconds. Then it turned, just a little, and we saw the heat signature of a head move. Then it walked out of frame. At the same time it moved, the voice on the recording changed pitch slightly, like whoever was making the sound had moved its chest position. Coincidence, I said, automatically. We need another capture, Nadine said, and we need someone else to look at this. That's how Matthew Reeves came in. Reeves was one of those people who seem like they're still half in another life, ex-Army linguist. Spent years listening to intercepted voices in languages nobody in our lab spoke. After he got out, he sort of slid sideways into historical linguistics. Proto-languages, reconstructions, that kind of thing. We knew him from conferences. He had a reputation for being able to see structure in noisy data. When I sent him a very sanitized email and asked if he'd look at a non-human vocalization with human-like features, he wrote back 5 minutes later, "Send. NDA first, if needed." We flew him up, put him in a bland university guest room, gave him coffee, which he mainlined. He had that look of someone who'd spent years in small rooms with headphones on. We sat him down in front of the screen and played sequence C47. Just the audio at first, no thermal. He listened with his eyes closed, like Nadine had. He tapped his fingers in time with the pauses. He didn't say anything until the end. "How many times have you heard this?" he asked. "Dozens," I said. "Hundreds, if you count little slices." "And how many other sequences like this do you have?" "Just this one so far." He nodded slowly. "It's not random," he said. "It's not just a call. There's repetition with variation. You got what looks like a root plus some kind of modifying bit. Case-like behavior maybe. And the pauses, you see how they're almost too regular? That's turn-taking. Or it mimics it." He leaned back and rubbed his eyes. "It's not like anything I know," he said. "But the scaffolding, the way the pieces hang together, it reminds me of very old structures. Proto stuff. Before languages branch off. I'm not saying this is human or non-human. I'm saying my brain recognizes the shape and I don't like that." Then we showed him the thermal clip. He watched it twice. No reaction. On the third pass he said, "How tall are those trees?" We told him. He did the same math we had. "So," he said, "you've got a big warm thing that moves like a biped, in sync with a structured vocal sequence, in a valley with no reason for a person to be there at 2:40-something in the morning in late October." He looked at me very directly. "And you want to know if you're crazy?" I didn't answer. He smiled a little, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're not crazy," he said. "You're in trouble." Up to that point, everything we had was still technically explainable. A weird animal call. A tall hunter in a weird outfit, a model overfitting to noise. If you wanted out, you could still walk away. We didn't. Instead, we decided we needed more data. "Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence," Raphael kept saying. "Right now, we just have interesting noise." He wasn't wrong. But looking back, I think that line gave us permission to keep going when we should have stopped. We planned a recapture. The idea was simple. Go back to the C47 site. Rebuild the sensor array bigger and smarter. Cover more angles. Get more audio, more thermal, more environmental data. See if the pattern repeats. See if whatever that was comes back. I pushed for a low-impact approach. No bait, no traps, no spotlights. Just ears and eyes. We scheduled the trip for early November, in a narrow window between storms. The forecast gave us 3 nights of okay, which, in that valley, means you might not drown. We loaded a university SUV with ARUs, infrasound sensors, 2 more thermal cameras, a small generator, a hardened field laptop, and way too much coffee. Megan came along, plus another grad, Dan, who'd done SAR training and liked sleeping in the dirt. The hike-in felt normal. Cold, wet, but normal. Mud sucking at our boots, our breath showing in little puffs. The river getting louder as we got closer, then fading as we moved away again, following the contours. At the original C47 tree, I did a quick circle with the handheld. No obvious tracks, just our old boot scuffs and some deer sign. We set 12 ARUs in a rough ring around the area, about 100 yards across. Each one got strapped to a tree, aimed outwards, with foam windshields and fresh cards. We put infrasound sensors closer to the ground. The thermals went on tripods, overlapping fields of view. We clapped and shouted at each sensor to sync the timestamps. Old school slate. The field laptop lived in a little canvas-walled base, basically a glorified tent with tables. The generator sat 20 yards away, wrapped in sound-dampening panels, cables running back like vines. By the time we finished, it was late afternoon. The light in that valley goes dim faster than you expect. The canopy swallows it. I remember the smell more than anything. Wet cedar, mud, that earthy rot you get when everything's been damp for weeks. We agreed that first night we'd mostly watch and listen. No fancy tests, just see if it was there. Nothing happened. We heard elk upslope, an owl close enough to make Megan jump when it called. Some branch breaks that turned out to be a porcupine waddling through. Around 3 in the morning, I was fighting to keep my eyes open in the trailer. My notebook has a line that just trails off mid-word. That's how uneventful it was, but the second night it came back. We didn't know it in the moment. In real time, the second night felt almost as dull as the first. The real punch landed back in the lab days later, but I'll tell it in the order we lived it. Second night, same valley. Colder. There was frost on the dead leaves by 8 p.m. Our breath looked thicker. The generator kept wanting to stall. Around midnight, the wind picked up. Not a storm exactly, but enough to make the canopy hiss. I remember thinking, great, all our recordings are going to be trash. Around 2, everything just eased. The wind dropped fast, like someone turned it off. The river sounded louder in the quiet. I was in the trailer with Raphael, half watching a live spectrogram feed from one of the ARUs, half trying not to fall asleep. Megan and Dan were in their tent, zipped up. Nadine and Reeves were back in town. They hadn't come out yet. 3 a.m., a pattern started creeping across the screen. At first, it was just a low smear. Then it sharpened. You could see the bands, the way they rose and fell. Then another band, higher, a reply. "Hey," Raphael said, sitting up. "We've got something on C42. And C49. That's the east side and the north side." He patched the audio through. Same low tone as the original U sequence. Same pause. Then the higher one. Back and forth. My chest tightened. I remember checking my watch like that mattered. Out in the dark, the thermal feeds showed trees, rocks, nothing else. No clear shape in that moment. The whole thing went on for maybe 6 minutes. Then there was a kind of layered sound like one voice, repeating a shorter phrase twice, and the other answering with a slightly modified version. Raphael muttered, "That's correction, teaching. It's like one's repeating, the other's adjusting. This is insane." I felt this weird mix of fear and pride. Fear because something was out there, doing something we didn't understand. Pride because from a data standpoint, this was gold. Structured repetition, multiple sensors. This is what scientists dream of. We sat there listening until the last sound faded into the background hiss. "How do you feel?" Raphael asked me after a while. "Cold," I said. "And like we just crossed a line." He laughed once, but it didn't sound happy. We stayed one more night because that was the plan. The third night gave us nothing obvious. some distant howls, some rain. We packed up on sore legs and drove home with terabytes of data. If we'd gone with our first impression that the second night was just more of the same, maybe this still would have found a way to ruin our lives, but slower. Instead, we fed it into the big model as soon as we got back. That's when things went sideways. It was a gray Wednesday when we loaded both sequences, the original C47 and the second night capture, into Raphael's full pipeline. We were all there. Me, Raphael, Nadine, Megan, even Reeves, who'd extended his stay. We sat around the workstation in a half circle, the way people sit around a campfire. Raphael had trained this huge transformer model on thousands of hours of human speech and non-human primate calls, plus our Cascadia wildlife dataset. Not to translate anything. The idea was to learn patterns of turn-taking, stress, that sort of thing. Useful for spotting behavioral changes. That's what the grant panel had signed off on anyway. Now he was fine-tuning it on just our sequence C47 cluster, as he called it. A handful of recordings from that valley. The screen showed a scrolling waveform, some colored attention maps, visualizations for the geeks. Off to one side was a little console window where the model could spit out a gloss, its best guess of a semantic label for each chunk of sound. It had done this before with human languages. You feed it hours of speech paired with situation data, and it learns that certain shapes tend to happen in greetings or warnings, or when someone points at food. Doing this with an unknown signal was experimental. We're not translating, Raphael kept saying. We're predicting. It's like labeling patterns. That's all. The first pass, it did nothing useful, just random garbage. Single words it grabbed from nearby human training sets. Call, low, unknown. We all sat there feeling stupid. Raphael tweaked parameters, limited some training sets, gave it stronger priors from non-human calls, weaker from human language. I didn't follow all of it. On the third or fourth run, the console window spat out a line that made Megan gasp. It was just 3 labels, spaced out under the waveform, greeting ass-wieldy words you know. It could have been coincidence. Some internal pattern picking similar embeddings from existing words. But the timing lined up with the first portion of sequence C47, the way the low color started, paused, repeated. It's mapping this chunk to greetings, Raphael said, voice shaking a little. Because the pattern looks like greetings it's seen before. The old words thing is just because it's pulling from the archaic language sets in the training data. It doesn't mean they're literally saying old words. It's a metaphor for it. A shape, not a content match. He sounded like he was trying to convince himself. We ran it again, this time on the second night capture. The teaching part, where one voice repeated a phrase and the other corrected it, generated another gloss line. You speak old words. Why you speak? We remember. The room went silent. Even the HVAC noise seemed to fade. I could feel my heart pounding. There's this moment when your brain just refuses. It says, no. This is a trick. This is noise that looks like sense. Nadine leaned forward and squinted at the screen. What's the confidence on those labels? She asked quietly. Raphael pulled up the numbers. They weren't high, but they weren't random either. Peaks where you'd expect peaks. This could still be pattern-matching nonsense, he said. Like we're basically asking it to hallucinate meaning out of unfamiliar signal. And guess what? It's hallucinating. Reeves cleared his throat. Or, he said, we're giving it something that actually has structure and it's doing its job. I whispered, I don't like this. Nobody answered. The turning point for me wasn't actually those first glosses. They were unnerving but still easy to shrug off. Oh, the AI's being poetic, you know. We could have stayed at that level of unease forever. The turning point was the playback test. That was Reeves's idea. Or, to be fair, the idea had been floating in the room and he just grabbed it and said it out loud. If this is interactive, he said, we need to see if it responds to us. Controlled. Carefully. Minimal provocation. I hated the word provocation in that context. Like we were poking something with a stick, Nadine immediately pushed back. We don't know what this is, she said. We don't know how loud its own calls are, relative to what we can safely play back. We don't know how close it was to that microphone. We could be blasting something into its face. She was right. There are ethics guidelines for playback and wildlife work. You can't just scream a mating call into an owl's ears on repeat, for example. It messes with their behavior. Raphael tried to calm it down. We're not talking about lures, no food, no bait. We're talking about a low-amplitude short segment. Think knocking on a door, not banging on it. We argued for hours. In the lab, later in a conference room with someone from the university's ethics board dialed in. We talked about volume limits, durations, stop conditions, about what we would do if anything looked like distress. In the end, we came up with a protocol that everyone could live with, even if nobody liked it. No food, no visual lures, no chasing. One short playback at a volume under local ambient peaks. Immediate shutdown if there was any sign of agitation. Vocal escalation, tree damage, anything. No repeated nights. One shot. And we agreed on another rule that came from me, and I'm still proud of that. The message, if you can call it that, had to be as neutral and non-threatening as possible. No direct questions, no commands. Nothing like, come here or show yourself. Just something like, we're listening. We built it from the signal itself. Raphael took the units the model had identified as greeting shapes and flattened them into a simple pattern. Nadine checked the intonation so it didn't accidentally sound like a challenge. We did not mirror any of the segments associated with thundersticks or marks in boxes or whatever. At that point, we didn't even know those were in there yet. The gloss, just for us, read WEMEN, no harm, WEMEN. No ESME, we treated it like we were speaking to a neighbor's dog. Friendly, but not trying to talk. I remember sitting at my desk the night before we went back out, staring at the printed protocol forms, thinking, if this was a new whale species or some kind of unknown bird, would I feel okay? The answer was yes. But this didn't feel like a whale or a bird. It felt like something standing behind a door, already listening. We went back to the valley for the playback on a Sunday night. Smaller team this time. Just me, Raphael, and Dan. Megan had classes. Nadine and Reeve stayed in town, monitoring the feed remotely from the lab. We set up a single ARU and a thermal, plus a subwoofer in a padded box wired to a laptop. No generator this time. We ran on batteries. We didn't want extra noise. It was colder than before. Frost on everything by 9. The ground had that crispy feel when you stepped on dead leaves. The sky was clear, no clouds to hold the warmth down. We got to the site around 10, set up in a hurry. I could see my breath the whole time. My fingers kept going numb when I tightened straps. My nose was running, and my brain was doing that thing where it feeds you every horror movie you've ever seen while you're trying to do basic tasks. We decided on a time window based on when the earlier signals had come through, between 3 and 4 in the morning. That meant we had hours to sit and wait. We huddled in the little canvas trailer with the laptop, a small red light on, everything else dark. We didn't talk much. Every sound felt too loud. At 3010 a.m., the forest felt, I don't know. This sounds stupid. It felt like the room feels when someone walks in behind you and doesn't say anything. Just that awareness. Dan whispered, "Do you feel that?" I said, "Yeah." Raphael's hands were on the keyboard. He had the playback file queued. The volume meter was set low. We calibrated it earlier with test tones. I radioed Nadine back at the lab. "We're at T-4 minutes, I said. My voice sounded thin. Her voice came back, crackly but calm. "Copy, Lena. We're rolling." The thermal feed showed trees, rocks, nothing else. The ARU meter showed ambient hiss, a few faint pops, probably branches contracting in the cold. "Okay," I said finally, on my count. 3, 2, 1, go. Raphael hit the key. The sound that came out of the subwoofer was subtle. You felt it more than you heard it. A soft, low shape of a call, rising and falling. Then a pause. Then a shorter answer. Then silence. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. For a moment, nothing happened. The forest sounded the same. The river hissed in the background. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then the owls stopped, not all at once. A distant one called, cut off halfway through. Another, closer, did a little whoo sound, and then nothing. The whole valley had been holding this quiet background of life, tiny night noises, insects, far-off yips. One by one, they went quiet. If you spend time in the woods, you know that feels wrong. Silence in a city is normal. Silence in a forest is heavy. On the screen, the ARU meter flattened. Just the baseline noise. I whispered, Kill playback. It's already off, Raphael said. His hands were off the keys. 10 seconds passed. 20, 30. Then, out of nowhere, the ARU picked up a sound that hit me right in the spine. It started low, like the original, but it climbed in a way that felt controlled. Not a scream, not a roar, a phrase. The waveform on the screen showed this long, slightly curved bar with little bumps in it like syllables. Then, before that first phrase even fully faded, a second came in, higher and sharper, overlapping just enough that you could tell it wasn't an echo. Dan whispered, "Two of them?" "Maybe," I said. The thermal feed flickered. Something warm had moved, far back between the trees. A vertical smear just for a second, then another a few yards away. Two shapes now, still, then a tiny tilt, like head movement. The first phrase ended. There was a pause. Then another phrase, shorter. Then a longer one, with a different rhythm. You could almost feel a question mark at the end of it, if that makes sense. The pitch went up and held, like the way we do when we ask something. Inside the laptop, the model was doing its work. Raphael had set it to run live, well, not live, but processing in near real time, chunking the audio as it came in and trying to assign glosses. The little console window started filling with words. At first it was nonsense. You and noun, you and noun, you and noun. Then new and noun. Then it hesitated. Literally, the cursor blinked for a moment like it was thinking, and three phrases popped up under the waveform. Why do your people need alone you kill your own different if you name uselessly you come? I read them once, fast, without really processing. Then my brain caught up. I felt my stomach drop. It was like somebody had yanked the floor out from under me. This is bad, I said. Shut it down. Shut everything down. Raphael was staring at the screen, eyes wide. It could be wrong, he said. This could be, it's just matching patterns. It doesn't know what it's saying. I don't care, I snapped. Kill the model. Kill recording, now. He killed the playback pipeline, but the ARU kept rolling. We always keep raw audio. I almost reached over and pulled the cable out of the wall, but some tiny rational part of me didn't want to corrupt the file. Outside, another phrase came in. Longer. The pitch dropped halfway through, then rose again, then ended flat. It sounded disappointed. That's the only word I have. Like a parent scolding a child who already knows better. I didn't want to see what the gloss would be. I really didn't, but my eyes went to the console anyway. Your people grow, our people shrink, so maybe talk before end. A second line, with lower confidence. Why loan lines is preferable to sharing world. Dan had his hands over his mouth. He was shaking. This is messed up, he whispered. This is so messed up. On the thermal, the two shapes stood still. One shifted its weight. Another turned its head, very slowly, like it was listening for something behind us or above us. I had this sudden, clear thought. They're not just reacting to the sound. They know there are minds on the other side of it. This is not safe, I said. Not for them, not for us. We are done. I reached over, ejected the SD card from the ARU interface, and slipped it into a little metal case we used for transport. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Pack up, I said, quietly. No more sounds, no talking. We're leaving. Nobody argued. People always ask, weren't you afraid they would follow you? That they'd attack the truck, throw rocks, whatever? That's the thing. I wasn't afraid of that. I think if they'd wanted to hurt us, they'd had plenty of chances. We were on their turf with microphones and cameras. They knew. What scared me was the way those glosses lined up with what we were actually doing. We were there to listen. We were there to record. We were building a picture of their presence, whether we admitted that to ourselves or not. And the model, right or wrong, had just spit out something like, if you fix us in your language, your species will come. That felt true, human true. We packed in a rush, but we didn't run. Recoiled cables, folded the tripod, stuffed the subwoofer back in its padded crate, all while trying not to look into the dark where the thermals had shown movement. By the time we started back down the spur road to the SUV, the forest noises had crept back in. A distant owl, some little rustles in the underbrush. The world had shrugged and gone back to normal. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Back in the lab the following week, everything took on this hyper-real quality. Fluorescent lights too bright, the hum of computers too loud, Coffee tasted metallic. We pulled the audio and video, backed them up to multiple drives, checked hashes, locked the physical media in a cabinet. All the normal stuff. Then we had a meeting. It was supposed to be just us, me, Raphael, Nadine, Reeves. But by the time it happened, there were two more people in the room, someone from the university's legal office and someone from research compliance. They'd read a summary of our notes already, not the raw glosses, but a version. The legal guy, Harris, wore a suit that didn't fit well and kept adjusting his glasses. The compliance woman, Taryn, had a notepad and that patient look of someone who has explained policies 1,000 times. I went first. I walked them through the timeline. The original C47 capture, the thermal, the second recording, the playback protocol, the live glosses. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. Just saying out loud the model output something that read as a moral warning was enough to make the room tighten. Harris spoke first. "So you're telling me," he said, "that you have a plausible signal from an uncatalogued hominid. Is that the word we're using? And that, in your best professional judgment, there is a non-zero chance that this signal reflects sentient-level cognition?" He said sentient like it tasted bad. Reeves nodded. "I wrote a memo," he said. "It's speculative, but yes," Harris sighed. "Okay," he said. "So from a liability standpoint, if the university has a reasonable belief that there's for lack of a better term, a people out there, and our actions could expose them to harm, we have a duty of care. At minimum, we do not broadcast their location. We do not invite third parties into the field. We do not release raw data that would allow triangulation without a serious ethical framework in place." He looked at me. "That means no conference talks, no press leaks, no podcasts," he said. "Not yet," Taryn added. "Also, if this becomes public and is taken seriously, there are endangered species implications, land use, logging, lawsuits from every direction. And if it's not taken seriously, there's still the risk of thrill seekers and hunters going out there trying to make a name for themselves." She made a face. "Either way, I don't see a good outcome for whatever these are." Raphael looked angry. "So what? We just bury it," he said. "We pretend it didn't happen? What about peer review, reproducibility? If this is real, the scientific community will descend on that valley like locusts," I cut in. "With cameras and rifles and drones, you know that." He glared at me but didn't argue. Nadine rubbed her temples. "I don't care about being first," she said quietly. "I care about not being the person who turned an undiscovered culture into a zoo exhibit or a trophy." The room went quiet. Harris folded his hands. "I'm not here to tell you what to believe," he said. "I'm here to tell you that if you publish anything that can reasonably be interpreted as there is a sentient uncatalogued hominid population in this protected area, we will be dealing with consequences for decades. Some of those consequences might protect them. Some might destroy them faster. And we will be the ones who lit the match." He looked around the table. "So before you decide you want to be on the news, ask yourself what you owe them, not what you owe your CV." That landed harder than any horror story. We agreed, in that room, to do 3 things. 1. Stop all active field collection at that site. No more ARUs, no more, just one more run. We'd leave them alone. 2. Scrub any coordinates from the data that might point to a specific valley. We'd use masking, transforms, whatever it took. If anything went out for analysis, it would be delocalized. 3. Set up an external ethics board. Not just university people. Indigenous representation, conservation voices, outside scientists. We'd lock the raw data set in escrow and nothing would be released without that board's approval. It felt righteous in a way, like we were doing the grown-up thing. But the universe doesn't care about our plans. The first sign that we weren't the only ones paying attention came 3 days after that meeting. I was in the lab alone. Raphael had gone home to sleep for once. Nadine was in a class. The grad students were off somewhere pretending they had normal lives. It was late, after 10. I was going through routine stuff, checking other ARUs, annotating owl calls, trying to pretend we didn't have a moral bomb sitting on a locked drive. Someone knocked on the lab door. Nobody knocks on that door. If you know us, you just walk in. If you don't, you never find the place. It's tucked in a weird corner of the building, down a half-basement hall. The knock was polite. 3 firm taps. I got up, already uneasy, and opened it. Two men stood there, mid-40s both of them. One white, one maybe Latino or mixed, both in those bland button-ups with jackets over them, like they were trying to split the difference between casual and we can arrest you. They smiled. Too easily. Dr. Park, the taller one said. Depends who's asking, I said. My voice came out flatter than I intended. They showed IDs. I won't say the agency on record because honestly it doesn't matter, and I don't feel like poking that bear. Let's just say federal, not local. Not academic. We're working with some folks who monitor non-standard signals, the tall one said, choosing his words. And some of your audio intersected with an ongoing operation. Nothing you did wrong. We'd just like to take a look at the raw files and your sensor logs. Timestamps, IDs, that sort of thing. My skin crawled. How did you even know we had anything? I asked. He smiled again. That same practice thing. Grant reports, network traffic, some shared computational resources, he said. Academia's not as air-dapped as it thinks it is. You're doing interesting work. The other one spoke up for the first time. We're particularly interested in the sequences labeled C47 and C51, he said, and the derived gloss outputs. Under NDA, of course. I hadn't mentioned glosses, not to anyone outside that tiny circle. Not in email, not in any report. My mouth went dry. I'll need to talk to University Council, I said. You can't just walk in and take our data. Of course, the tall one said smoothly. We're not here to compel anything today. Just a voluntary handoff so we can make sure there's no overlap with classified material. We'd hate to see your work get tangled in that kind of red tape. He handed me a card. We'll be in town through Friday, he said. Give us a call. They left. Just like that. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. Later that night, I checked our server logs. I'm not a security expert, but I know enough to see when something's off. There had been access attempts. Multiple. All denied thanks to our IT guys being paranoid by default. But the probes were there. Finding doors, rattling handles. I took screenshots, sent them to Raphael and the university's IT. Nobody was surprised. That almost made it worse. 2 nights later, Reeves called me, voice shaking. They broke into my place, he said. What? My rental, he said. Nobody home. They picked the lock or something. Cops say it was probably just kids, but they didn't take the TV. They didn't take cash. They took my laptop and the external drives in the drawer. That's it. We didn't say it's them. We didn't have to. After that, we started physically locking everything down. Drives in safes. Faraday bags for phones during meetings. It felt paranoid and late. In the middle of all that, the audio kept working on us. We kept listening, even when we said we weren't going to. It was like poking at a sore tooth with your tongue. Some of the most disturbing stuff we found wasn't in the obvious loud phrases. It was in the quiet bits underneath. Raphael ran a deeper source separation pass on the second night recording, just to see if there were any hidden layers. The model peeled away river noise, wind, distant animals. What was left, very faint, almost below the noise floor, was something that sounded uncomfortably like human speech rhythm. Not English, not Spanish, not anything that clear. Just the cadence. A start, a couple of stressed beats, a fall. Like someone trying to copy the shape of a sentence without having the mouth for it. In one tiny fragment, maybe half a second long, you could hear a painful sounding struggle to form an R or L sort of shape. The gloss didn't even try to label it. But listening to it, my gut reaction was, hard speak. That's how it felt. Like someone pushing against an anatomical limit. It made me realize something that hadn't clicked before. If they'd been listening to us campers, hunters, lost hikers for years, they'd have all this raw data of human speech. But if their vocal tract was different enough, actually reproducing that speech would hurt. Or at least be hard, so instead they carved their own parallel system. Their own shapes. Their own way of marking questions, warnings, memories, and here we were, yanking those shapes into human words with a machine that didn't understand what it was stepping on. That's when the guilt really set in for me. Not just fear, not just wonder, guilt. We were trespassing on a conversation that wasn't meant for us, and then we'd gone a step further and tried to talk back. The last thing we did, before we shut everything down, was more cautious than anything we'd done up to that point. We took a tiny subset of the audio, just a couple of minutes from each sequence, stripped of all location data, and sent it to 3 independent experts under a kind of double-blind setup. No mention of Bigfoot, no mention of AI glosses. We told them it was an unknown, non-human vocalization captured in the North American forest, and asked for a basic analysis. One was a primatologist, one was a forensic linguist, one was an acoustic engineer. They all came back separately with versions of the same sentence. The primatologist said, "The turn-taking and structured repetition are more consistent with intentional communication than with alarm calls." The linguist wrote, "There appears to be a small inventory of recurring units combining in non-random patterns. Caution is warranted, but this is compatible with a language-like system." The engineer, who I thought would be the most skeptical, wrote, "The source characteristics and format structure are consistent with a large, upright primate vocal tract." None of them said, "This is impossible." None of them said, "You're hearing things." That should have been thrilling. Instead, it felt like a sentence. We had our ethics board framework drafted by then, names down, invitations ready. We had our shutdown plan. Remove any remaining ARUs in adjacent valleys, quietly. Wipe coordinates. Lock raw data in escrow. We followed through. We hiked back out there one last time as a team, me, Raphael, Nadine, even Megan and Dan. No gear except the GPS and some hand tools. We pulled the last ARU off that cedar trunk, took down the thermals, left the bolts in the trees as a kind of scar. At one point, standing there with the strap in my hand, I had this weird urge to say something out loud. Not through a subwoofer, not through a model, just a sentence. In English. Something like, "We heard you, we're leaving." I'm sorry, I didn't. It felt stupid and presumptuous, but I thought it. On the hike out, I kept glancing back, like I expected to see a tall shape between the trees. I never did. The forest looked exactly like it always had. That was almost worse. We turned in our final field report, bland and vague. Equipment redeployment due to changing priorities, that sort of thing. Externally, the project kept going. We just focused on other valleys, other calls, other fires. Internally, we closed the door. Or tried to. So how did it leak? That's what people always want to know. They assume there was some grand whistleblower moment. Someone downloading the files at midnight and driving them to a journalist in a rainstorm. Reality was smaller than that. Raphael couldn't let it go. I don't say that to blame him. I think any scientist in his position would have done something similar. We're wired to want answers. He told me, months later, that he'd pulled out the smallest possible segment of the dataset, one phrase from each sequence, heavily downsampled and masked, and sent it to 3 colleagues overseas he trusted. No context. No coordinates. No mention of hominids. He framed it as an anomaly for model testing. All 3 came back with comments along the lines of, "If this is a prank, it's a good one. If it's not, you need to be careful." One of them, a guy he'd worked with on bird call detection, wrote, "If this ever gets out, it's going to make people go crazy in the woods." Raphael didn't forward those emails to anyone. He kept them. But at some point, either one of those colleagues talked out of turn, or someone's email got scraped, or someone in that federal circle decided to stir the pot. A year later, it leaked. A science journalist got an anonymous envelope. No return address. Inside was one printed spectrogram, 7 minutes long, labeled C47. Under it, in plain text, "WHY lonely is preferable to sharing world." On the back, in shaky handwriting, "Don't come looking." He started asking around. Quiet emails, forum posts. Anyone seen this? Someone recognized the style of our spectrograms. Then came the rumors. A lab in Washington used AI to translate Sasquatch. Now it's a simple story online. They talked to Bigfoot. The government shut it down. Nobody talks about duty of care, or land rights, or what happens when you drop a pin on a map for something that can't defend itself. That's why I'm talking now. Not to prove it. I can't. I won't. Just to say the part no one wants to hear. We stopped on purpose. We took the mics down, locked the drives, kept the coordinates out of everything. Because once you name something, people go after it. With cameras, with rifles, with drones. The scariest thing wasn't seeing a shape on thermal. It was realizing they were asking us a question we already knew the answer to. If you admit we're real, can you stop yourselves?